You were praised for following the rules, for being good, for doing what was expected. Somewhere along the way, you internalized a quiet belief that your value is conditional. Conditional on performance, conditional on approval, conditional on being useful. No one said it outright, but you felt it. When love came only after achievement, when affection vanished in moments of weakness, when the silence after your failure was louder than the applause after your success. This is the belief that began to rot your self-worth from the inside out. I am only as valuable as what I can produce. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this coming over a century ago. He warned not of suffering, but of meaningless suffering, of people who had been taught to measure their worth through external systems. Morality inherited, roles assigned, and standards absorbed without question. He watched how society trained people to be obedient, not free, efficient, not authentic. He called this the slave morality, a mindset that teaches you to derive your identity from how well you serve the values of others, not how deeply you live your own. And here's the part that stings. You might believe you're self-made, independent, original. But if your self-worth rises and falls with numbers, likes, income, weight, grades, status, then you're still living under that system. You're still enslaved to a belief you didn't choose. Nietzsche wasn't simply challenging religion or tradition. He was challenging the entire framework of value, who gets to define it and why we accept it without resistance. He believed the modern human had been spiritually castrated, made docile by comfort and conformity, and worst of all, taught to fear their own power. Because to reclaim your worth without permission, to say, I matter even if I produce nothing today, that's dangerous. It threatens the systems that profit from your insecurity. So the belief persists that you must earn rest, that confidence must be justified, that love must be proven. But what if that belief is a lie? What if your self-worth was never supposed to be a moving target? What if it's not something to chase, but something you were born with and only forgot how to see? This isn't about empty affirmation. This is about psychological reconstruction, about peeling back what society installed to uncover what Nietzsche called the will to power. Not domination over others, but mastery of the self. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this belief takes root and why it's so difficult to unlearn even when you know it's ruining you. Because the most dangerous prison isn't built from walls. It's built from assumptions you never questioned. So here we are. You weren't born believing you were only valuable if you performed. You didn't come into the world needing to prove your existence. At the start, you were whole, screaming, wild, unfiltered, a being of pure presence. But very early, maybe too early, you learned a lesson that stuck. Approval is survival. The moment a parent looked away when you cried too loud, the moment your teacher smiled only when you colored inside the lines, the moment your joy became too much, your sadness too sensitive, your questions too complicated, a script began writing itself inside your nervous system. And that script whispered, be less of yourself and they'll love you. Do more of what they want and you'll be safe. This is where the belief was born, that your worth isn't inherent, it's transactional. Nietzsche saw this process clearly. He wrote of herd morality, where individuals are conditioned to internalize the values of the collective, not because they're true, but because they're safe. In this system, being good means obeying the values of the tribe, fitting in, conforming, making yourself small enough to be accepted and useful. And in return, you get social security, but at the cost of your inner compass. This is how society forges people who can function, but not flourish. Children become pleasers. Students become perfectionists. Adults become performers, not because they're flawed, but because they've been taught to survive through compliance. And over time, you forget that the self you present isn't the self you are. Nietzsche believed this was one of the most dangerous forms of human suffering, when we betray our authentic nature not out of malice, but out of adaptation, when we silence our instincts, our desires, and even our anger, not because we are peaceful, but because we are domesticated. This domestication doesn't just affect behavior, it infects self-worth. You stop asking, "Is this who I want to be?" and start asking, "Will they approve?" You stop creating for expression and start producing for applause. You stop living as a question and start surviving as an answer. And this is the trap. Because no matter how much you achieve, how much you earn, how many followers or promotions or compliments you receive, it never fills you. Why? Because your self-worth is not fed by performance. It's rented. Every time you succeed, the lease renews. Every time you fail, eviction threatens. That's not self-worth. That's self-leasing. And Nietzsche had a word for this kind of life: resentment. A deep, slow-burning resentment toward life itself, toward others who seem freer, toward yourself for never feeling enough. He believed this resentment, or ressentiment, was the foundation of modern morality. That instead of rising above our suffering, we build systems that make virtue out of weakness. We call humility a virtue, but it's often fear of our own power. We call obedience maturity, but it's often terror in disguise. This might sound brutal, but Nietzsche wasn't promoting cruelty. He was demanding awakening. Because if you don't wake up, here's what happens. You chase success not because you love the work, but because failure feels like death. You chase beauty not because you feel worthy, but because aging feels like erasure. You chase love not as a choice, but as a plea for proof that you matter. And it's not your fault. No one taught you how to separate your value from your output. No one told you that you were allowed to exist unimpressively. That worth doesn't have to be earned. It can be remembered. But Nietzsche did. Not in soft words, not in affirmations, but in a call to destruction. The destruction of every inherited belief that keeps you small, silent, and starving for permission. So the question becomes, if you didn't have to earn your worth, what would you stop doing? And maybe more importantly, what would you finally start doing? In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the psychological consequences of this belief. Because it's not just limiting your dreams, it's rewriting your identity. And it's time to take the pen back. The belief that you must earn your worth doesn't just shape your goals, it shapes your entire identity. Because when your sense of value depends on how you're perceived, your life becomes one long audition. You curate your emotions for acceptability. You sculpt your opinions for safety. You shrink your needs so you won't be too much, and stretch your limits so you won't be too little. And before you know it, you're not a person anymore. You're a projection, a role, a finely tuned echo of what you think the world wants to hear. This is where the most dangerous damage happens, not in a single collapse, but in the slow erosion of authenticity. Psychologist Carl Rogers once said that the greatest cause of suffering is the incongruence between who we are and who we pretend to be. But it doesn't start with pretending. It starts with protecting. You build an identity that shields you from rejection. You say what's expected. You work harder than anyone. You smile when you're falling apart. And slowly, you begin to believe this constructed self is all you are. You confuse performance with personality. You confuse applause with love. You confuse attention with intimacy. And worst of all, you start confusing survival with living. Let's go deeper. This belief doesn't just warp how you relate to yourself, it distorts how you relate to others. You start measuring people not by who they are, but by what they give you: validation, praise, attention, usefulness. You start hiding your struggles, not because you're ashamed, but because being broken makes you feel unworthy. You build relationships that revolve around your role, not your truth. You become the caretaker, the achiever, the comedian, the strong one, the one who's always fine. And while people may admire you, they don't see you. They can't, because you're only showing them what you think they'll love. And here's the paradox: the more you perform for love, the less loved you feel. Because deep down, you know what they're loving isn't you. It's the role. The more they praise the mask, the more invisible you become. And Nietzsche would tell you this is spiritual violence, because it turns the soul, something sacred, into a brand, a product, a tool for gaining approval in a world that profits off your insecurity. But it gets worse. You don't just hide your vulnerability, you resent it. You start seeing softness as weakness. You start suppressing the parts of you that don't perform well. And when others show their vulnerability, you judge them too. Why? Because if you had to earn your worth, they should too. If you had to hustle for love, why should they get it for free? This is what Nietzsche meant when he warned us about morality rooted in resentment. When a person feels powerless to live freely, they start worshiping the very prison that holds them. They redefine weakness as virtue. They call mediocrity humility. They label rebellion as arrogance and boldness as selfishness. But it's not true morality. It's the morality of the defeated, the morality of the person who buried their true self so long ago they now hate anyone who dares to live fully. And make no mistake, this belief doesn't just affect individuals, it builds entire cultures. We live in a society where worth is quantified, likes, followers, income, accolades. We live in a system where rest is laziness, doubt is failure, softness is shame. Children are raised to chase trophies, not truth. Adults are rewarded for being productive, not present. People are praised for being low maintenance, high achieving, emotionally stable. Code for self-abandoning, chronically overextended, and emotionally shut down. And we call this success. But Nietzsche wouldn't. He'd call it self-denial institutionalized. He'd call it a culture of spiritual decay, where the most basic truth has been lost. That you don't need to earn your place here. That being human is not a job to qualify for. That your value is not a question, it is a given. But if you've built your whole life chasing proof of your worth, this truth doesn't comfort you, it threatens you. Because if you didn't have to hustle, perform, or prove to be worthy, then what was it all for? The years of overwork, the nights you cried in silence, the relationships you stayed in because being needed felt like being loved. The version of you that has carried so much for so long just to be enough. If it wasn't necessary, then what was it? It was survival. And now that survival has done its job, it's time to choose something better. But first, you have to face the lie. Because unless you confront this belief at the root, you'll keep building better prisons and calling them freedom. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when you begin to dismantle this lie, and what it takes to finally rebuild a life that isn't about proving you matter, but about living like you already do. So this is what happens. There comes a moment, subtle but seismic, when the ache of proving becomes louder than the fear of being seen. It doesn't come with trumpets. It doesn't come in a grand revelation. It comes in silence, a pause, a deep cellular fatigue, and a voice inside you that says, I can't keep doing this. That's the moment the contract starts to break. What contract? The one you never consciously signed but have lived by every day of your life. I will earn my worth by being what the world wants. Nietzsche would call this a slave morality. Not because you are weak, but because you've been trained to believe your value comes from outside you. That if you just achieve enough, perform well enough, love hard enough, you'll finally be chosen, finally be safe. But that moment, the quiet revolt, comes when the strategy fails. When you get the degree, the job, the relationship, the applause, and still feel hollow. This is where the real transformation begins. Not in some motivational surge, but in the quiet act of no longer performing. It begins by asking a question most people never dare to ask. What if I stopped trying to be enough and just was? It sounds simple, but it's not. Because when you've built your identity on performance, authenticity feels like death. To stop earning love means risking losing it. To stop impressing means risking being ignored. To stop fixing yourself means risking the truth that maybe you were never broken to begin with. But here's what Nietzsche understood better than most. True freedom doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from no longer needing to be. This is the turning point, the reorientation, the refusal to keep chasing a finish line that was never real. So what now? Step 1. Deconstruct your self-worth system. Ask yourself, where did I learn that love had to be earned? Who taught me that my value depended on being useful, beautiful, impressive? What part of me did I have to hide to be accepted? Don't answer too fast. Sit with it. Because the belief isn't just in your mind, it's in your nervous system. It lives in your shoulders, your posture, your people-pleasing, your perfectionism, your inability to rest without guilt. This belief isn't a thought, it's a survival pattern, and survival patterns don't let go until you feel them fully. Step 2. Grieve the old self. Yes, grieve. Because when you stop performing, you lose more than applause. You lose identity. You'll question everything. Who am I if I'm not the reliable one? Who am I without my achievements? Who am I if I stop trying to fix myself? And here's the truth. You don't know yet, and that's okay. Let yourself grieve the roles that once kept you safe. Thank them, mourn them, but don't mistake them for you. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, that uncertainty isn't failure, it's rebirth. It's what happens when you start living from truth, not fear. Step 3. Practice radical non-performance. This doesn't mean quitting your job or ghosting your life. It means something more subversive. Saying no without justifying. Being silent without guilt. Admitting you don't know. Letting yourself be seen without being spectacular. These moments, mundane on the surface, are revolutions on the inside. Each one rewires your nervous system to believe, I am safe without the performance. Each one untangles your worth from the need to be impressive. Each one reclaims a piece of your humanity. Because here's what Nietzsche would tell you. The Übermensch, the person beyond societal conditioning, isn't someone who dominates others. It's someone who reclaims themselves. Someone who creates their own values, their own worth, their own definition of love, meaning, and success. But that creation can't begin until the lie dies. And the lie is this: I must be more to be worthy. No, you are already worthy. Not because of what you do, but because you are. The self you've spent a lifetime editing, suppressing, upgrading, it was never the problem. The problem was the belief that it had to be something more to be accepted. And the cost of that belief? Your peace, your presence, your power. Step 4. Replace proof with presence. Start living as if you don't need to prove anything. Rest without earning it. Love without performing it. Speak without packaging it. This isn't self-indulgence, it's self-reclamation. Because worth isn't something you get at the end of a checklist. It's something you return to the moment you stop pretending. So ask yourself, what would it feel like to live without the need to impress? What would it sound like to hear your own voice beneath the noise? What would it mean to be fully seen and still stay? That's not weakness. That's liberation. And Nietzsche didn't write for the complacent. He wrote for the ones ready to tear off the scaffolding of false self-worth and build something real. That building begins now. In the next and final chapter, we'll uncover the ultimate shift, the realization that the search for worth was always a distraction from the truth, that you were never supposed to be perfect, only whole. Stay with me. There's a moment of strange quiet after the collapse, when the performance ends, when the applause fades, when the frantic search for validation finally burns out. What's left? Not confidence, not clarity, but stillness. And in that stillness, something ancient stirs. A part of you that doesn't beg to be worthy. It remembers. Remembers what you were before the world told you what to be. That's the truth this entire journey has been circling. The one belief destroying your self-worth wasn't that you were unworthy. It was that you had to become something to be enough. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't just deconstruct morality. He shattered the illusion that your value is conditional. He saw that most suffering begins the moment you outsource your worth to religion, to culture, to other people's praise, to ideas you inherited but never questioned. And here's the twist most people miss. Nietzsche didn't want you to become a god. He wanted you to become yourself, unapologetically, unshakably, radically yourself. That's the return. Not to some ideal version of you, but to the version you abandoned in the name of survival. The one who didn't perform, the one who didn't posture, the one who didn't ask permission to simply be. But how do you return to something that's been buried for so long? You start by digging, not to become more, but to shed all the false beliefs, all the inherited shame, all the quiet rules you internalized, like don't be too much, don't need anyone, don't speak unless it's smart, useful, or perfect, earn your place or lose it. And slowly you realize the self that was crushed under those rules never died. It waited through the pressure, through the pretending, through the striving. It waited for the day you'd get tired enough to finally look inward and say, enough. I'm not playing this game anymore. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of sovereignty. And Nietzsche called it becoming the Übermensch, not a superhuman in the comic book sense, but a human no longer enslaved by borrowed values. One who creates their own meaning, their own morality, their own self-worth. Because here's what they don't tell you in self-help books. You don't build worth, you uncover it. You don't prove you deserve love. You remember you were always lovable, even when you weren't perfect, productive, or pleasing. You don't earn your place in this world, you inhabit it, fully, messily, beautifully. That's what it means to return to wholeness. And wholeness is not the same as perfection. Perfection is brittle, anxious, obsessed with control. Wholeness is wild, curious, and free. It allows for contradictions. It makes space for shadow. It welcomes the broken parts, not to fix them, but to include them. Because you are not just the light, you are also the rage, the sorrow, the longing, the chaos, the ache, and you are still worthy. Even when you're confused, even when you're grieving, even when you fall short, especially then. Because worth that depends on performance dies the moment you falter. But worth that's rooted in truth, it stays. Through failure, through heartbreak, through silence. Nietzsche once wrote, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." And that's what this entire journey has been about. Not self-improvement, self-possession. So here's the final question. What if you stopped fixing and started facing? What if you stopped asking, how can I be better? And asked, who am I without the masks? What if your healing doesn't lie in changing who you are, but in changing how you see who you are? That's not a mindset shift. That's a spiritual awakening. Because the self-worth you're looking for doesn't come from outside. It doesn't arrive when they love you, when you're successful, when you finally feel enough. It comes in the quiet, terrifying, holy moment you realize, I don't need to become anything to deserve my own love. That's the return to presence, to truth, to the soul that's been waiting underneath all your trying. And here's where Nietzsche was right again. You don't find your life's meaning, you create it. Not because you're lost, but because you're free. And when you create your life from that place, not from fear, not from lack, not from shame, but from self-trust, everything shifts. You stop chasing, you start becoming, you stop shrinking, you start taking up space, not as a performance, but as a right. So let this video be more than content. Let it be a mirror. Let it be a challenge. Let it be a return. Because you are not here to earn your place. You are here to remember you already belong. You don't need to be impressive. You need to be real. And once you taste that, once you feel the power of not needing to be fixed, of standing tall in your full, flawed, radiant self, you'll never go back to the lie. You'll never again trade your self-worth for someone else's approval. You'll never again betray yourself just to feel accepted. And that's the beginning of freedom. If this video spoke to you, hit like to help it reach others lost in the same illusion. Subscribe for more philosophy and psychology that challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself. Stay awake. Thank you.